two of the most precious people in my life right here. And we almost lost each other because of my actions, not theirs. But I just saw my son for the first time in 3 years. This is Michael right here. Raise your hand, Mike. And this is his beautiful sister Mary right there, who I saw for the first time just a little over a month ago. And I'll tell you the story of how I almost lost him. So, I'm in a fraternity at the U, and that's just a license to do the wrong thing if you have this duplicity that I had already. And so I would beg my son not to go through, you know, I mean, you're gonna do what you're gonna do, and you're gonna kill it, I know you are. I'll tell you more about him in a minute. But I just, the problem with what happened at that time was that I had a lot of people that were doing the same thing with me. And you know, several of us wanted to go on missions, and several of us didn't. And most of those gentlemen came back and lived the gospel because they had real testimonies. I was blessed to be called to Brazil, to Rio de Janeiro, and I went and I loved it. And I had a great bishop at that time. His name is Craig Meacham. And he pretty much saved my life getting me on a mission. And the reason why I say that is because I was so crazy that if I had been here another year without having a little different direction, I might not be walking or not even be here by some of the things I was doing, adrenaline-wise. And so I had this incredible experience on my mission, and I loved it. But when I came home, I came back to that same environment. And I just kind of, I fought which path to, I had a leg on each path, really. That's what I was doing. And so as I speak to you today, I want you to know that I sat in your seat at 17, 18, and said, what I'm about to tell you, that'll never happen to me. And so as I tell you this story, please know that it can happen to any one of us. Anytime we're not keeping every jot and tittle of the law of chastity, of the word of wisdom, of keeping every one of the commandments, and making it an honor and a mission to do that every day. I'm on that mission today, but I'm almost 60. How immature am I spiritually to have had that have to take me that long to get up every morning and to have that be joyful for me to engage in? So I graduated from college, and I went and worked in Florida and managed a water park, and then I still struggled back and forth with the word of wisdom. But in my 20s, in my later 20s, I got to where I felt I kind of had it licked, you know. I went long periods of time where I didn't struggle with it. And in my late 20s, I got into climbing. And it was kind of a more peaceful, less adrenalized sport for me. I mean, I guess you're climbing cliffs, so maybe it's not the greatest, non-adrenaline sport, but I just wasn't afraid of any, just standing on the edge of a cliff as long as it was strong and I was there. I knew I wasn't going to fall off, and so I had a confidence about it, and I got into climbing. There's something about putting in protection, and I liken that protection to living the commandments. I liken that every time you put in a piece of connection, you tie yourself in to that rock or to that ice. As a strength, as keeping a commandment. Each one of them has a different purpose. Each piece of gear has a different purpose. And so I went into a really strong period of my life at that point. And I started to climb some of the highest mountains in the world, and I was on the Utah Mount Everest team. And they had tried Mount McKinley 3 previous times. It's the coldest mountain in the world. It's up in Alaska. It's 20,320. It's about, that's the elevation. It's about 100 miles from the rim of the North Pole. Everest is down by the equator, so barometrically speaking, about 20,000 on Mount McKinley is about 26,000 on Mount Everest as far as how much oxygen there is to breathe. And they had tried it 3 previous times and didn't make it. They never put a man on top. And so in June of 1992, I'd been training with him for 6 months, and I took 6 months off work, and I trained full time to be able to do it. I went from about 225 to about 175, and I had no body fat, and I could just do anything. It was crazy, you know. I was able to get in there. I hope I aspire to get in that kind of shape again. It probably will never happen. But I was on this mountain, you know, and they flew us out of Talkeetna onto Mount McKinley, and the bush pilot flips around, he pulls onto this little glacier. You think you're gonna run into the mountain, and he pulls onto this glacier and stops at like 300 yards because it's going uphill, and he whips around, he opens the flaps, and they throw your gear out, and they say, "We'll see you in exactly 3 weeks at this time." And they close the flaps, and they take off, and they're just, they're gone, you know, and you're on this mountain, you have this feeling, wow, what have we gotten ourselves into? Well, I felt that feeling many more times as I tell you this story. It was kind of a lonely feeling. But I had some good team members with me at that time. And later, the part of my story that I'm gonna tell you, I did not have good team members. That makes all the difference. So good friends means everything. Who you hang out with is who you are. It's just the way it is. So we had this incredible experience on Mount McKinley. 11 people died the month I was there, though, and it was unfortunate. But after a period of time, my team kind of fell apart, but there was another team that had a strong climber, and the two of us summited together. And there was an experience that I'll tell briefly. And I'll preface it by saying, I'm so grateful to be in a position today where I can help others, where I can do what they do at the Other Side Academy, which I'll tell you about, and be able to be in a position to help and bless others. It's not very comfortable for me often because I still fight shame, and it's hard for me to tell this story. But on Mount McKinley, it was a good experience. This fellow that I was climbing with, he was Russian, and he was a much better climber than I was. But as we got up to this place called Denali Pass, we passed this Japanese tent of these gentlemen that died, and we could see their blood trail. And I don't know, I had a hard time communicating with this guy. And he was on lead because he was such a better climber. And he got up to Denali Pass, and it's like running a marathon breathing through a straw. You move slowly. And as we made our way and protected ourselves with crampons and our ice axes, I saw that he was changing his gear because the wind hit him from the north side, and the temperatures could get to 70 below. And it was just a gnarly environment. There's only two things, nothing survives up there, but so you can only be there for a minute. And by the time it took me from here to the back of the room to get to him, well, I wasn't that far, maybe from here to that wall. Because you give yourself, if one guy falls, there has to be some dynamics in the rope, and anyway, that's how it works. And so it took me about 2 minutes to get to where he had stopped. And he was trying to put on layers because we were in this intense wind, and he didn't do it fast enough. And he was losing dexterity in his fingers. And I got to him and I said, Mikhail, I said, we need to keep climbing because you can't stop, you know, or you cool down so quickly. And so I said, I'm gonna go on lead. And he said, okay. I said, are you okay? And he said, he's okay. And so I went on lead, and I started feeling pull on the rope. I was starting to have to pull him. And as I placed my ice gear and I was moving up the mountain, I kept feeling this pull, and I thought, I can't summit like this. And I had this crazy adrenalized, I still fought it, I want that summit. I've been training 6 months for this, and we're going to Everest next month, and so I want that summit. And I kept feeling this pull on the rope. And so finally, I went back and I said, Mikhail, what's going on? And he said, I'm just not feeling great. And you get goofy. I've seen triathletes that have run 20 Ironmen at 20,000 feet get goofy on mountains. It's just a physiological thing. You don't know whether you're going to be able to have what it takes to do it or not. It doesn't mean you're any better or worse of an athlete. It's just how we're made. And he said, I'm going to go back to those rocks and I'm going to go down to that Japanese tent. Because he knew I wanted to go. And so I unclipped. How dumb was that? Oh my gosh. It's another dumb thing that I did in my life, but I unclipped. Because I was going to the summit. And I got about 10 minutes away. And something came over me. And it wasn't not being confident. That's not what it was. Something came over me. It said, James, something's wrong. And so right there, I found a place where I could kind of get on my knees and I asked Heavenly Father, what is this I'm feeling? And I had this overwhelming experience, and I felt my great-grandfather. His name is James Henry Moyle. I just felt him. I had never felt that before or since, but I felt him. Not to say that he hasn't been there for me, because I know he has, And the voice was, go back. And I pictured his face. And so I went back and I found Mikhail in these rocks. And one of his crampons had broken and he dropped his eye sacks. Cardinal sin. Don't drop your eye sacks. And so somehow, and I'm telling you, I did not save this guy's life. The papers all made it seem like that when I got home. But I did not save his life. Something much, much higher took over. And I identify what that is, and you know what I'm talking about. And I was able to get him, we were together able to get back to this tent of these deceased Japanese climbers, and that tent saved his life because he couldn't climb any further. He was done. It took me almost an hour and a half just to boil enough water to keep him alive through the night. And I didn't have a tent. I had the right kind of summit gear. I didn't have a sleeping bag. I had one in my tent down at where the base camp was, but I had the kind of mountain gear where I didn't need that, But I knew I couldn't spend overnight sleeping and not keeping active, and so I had to go down. I left him in the tent, and the next day we got back together, and he came up and gave me a chocolate bar, and he said, "Thanks for saving my life." But the reason I tell you that story is because I just got a tiny little glimpse of what I get to do now for the rest of my life. And here's the story. So I met their incredible mom, and we got married, and graduate school, more graduate school, and we built a home, beautiful home up in the mountains. Had horses, all the toys. I was doing well in business. And I was creating my own incredible family. JJ, my oldest, and Emily, my oldest daughter, weren't here, but then we had Mary and we had Michael. And just picture the perfect family, because we were, but eventually this duplicity started to creep back in. It's okay, because the doctor gave it to me. It's okay. But who do you think was whispering that to me? So when you feel that feeling, and you know it's not the spirit, pay attention. Because what happened to me at that point is the adversary is cunning, and he is wise, and he knows everything, but chooses the wrong thing and wants us to choose the wrong thing. And so his patience and cunning with me took him decades, but he got me. Eventually, I couldn't receive direction from the Spirit because of this duplicity and this addiction to prescription drugs. And eventually my incredible family, first my partners, my real estate development partners had to ask me to leave, and I was weeks away from finishing a project that was all mine. Today it's called Alpine Village. We bought the old Green's grocery store down by the BYU Stadium and tore that down and built this incredible village for BYU students. It was my baby. I named it after your great grandpa's cabin up in Brighton. It said Alpine above the door, named it Alpine Village. But my partners had to invite me to leave because I was becoming a total mess. And later my family had to invite me to leave. And they should have done it sooner. But they loved me, and we enable our family, we enable each other, we enable those that we love, and tough love is hard. So it didn't take me long before I just took a complete face plant. I'm talking full face plant, boom, onto the street. I was a homeless addict within months, with a needle in my arm for 5 years. So bad that I was kicked out of the road home permanently. Pretty hard to get kicked out of the road home permanently. I was kicked out of the rescue mission permanently. I tried to go through their little program. I'd spent hundreds of thousands on rehabs over the years, and they just didn't work for someone like me. And what made me worse than, the general addict that fights addiction is entitlement and inhumility. Those are my big weaknesses. And so I have to look in the mirror every day and say, hey, how are you going to avoid that, James? But I fought for, so now I'm on the street in my 50s. How crazy is that? And I didn't seek shelter. I didn't really get cold. I knew how to survive. I didn't know how to spiritually survive it. Well, I did know, and what happened was my compass broke, and I allowed it to break, and I didn't service it. So I'm a homeless addict on the street for 5 years, fighting below freezing temperatures, fighting period to keep doing what I was doing. I became a petty thief, so I could go get high. And everything I put into that needle, 100% of the effort, which was all my effort, was to put whatever in that needle could numb my shame for a short period of time, because it doesn't work for very long. And one day I was sitting against a convenience store up in Sugar House, and by this point I hadn't prayed in years. And I was sitting against this convenience store, and all of a sudden I was not afraid to die. As a matter of fact, I had died a few times, and they brought me back on the table, or in the hotel room, or wherever I was. But I had this epiphany. Thank goodness. And it was, hey James, even though you're not afraid to die physically, clearly you aren't because of the way you act. But all of a sudden I became afraid of permanent spiritual death. And it dawned on me what I was doing to my soul. And again, I heard stories like, maybe not this exact story, but stories like this when I was your age. And I thought it'll never happen to me. And so I had a moment of clarity and a moment of sobriety. And I said, please, I'll do whatever it takes. Because I'm about to lose them forever. or at least some kind of very limited contact, which I was not okay with. And so that moment of clarity made me want to start fighting. And it wasn't long thereafter that that same bishop that I told you about, and I was never at this convenience store, and he was rarely there in that area. He walked up, and I was sitting there. What are the odds? He walks up, and I looked at him, and I said, "Meet you?" And he looked down at me, and of course he couldn't recognize me. I had a beard, and I weighed 130 pounds. I stunk, and I had ratty clothes on. I had a shopping cart, you know. I mean, I passed me 9 times on the way down here. And I stood up and I said, "It's Moyle." And he said, "James," and he didn't care about the beard or the stink or any of that. He just embraced it. And tried to buy me the convenience store. And I said, "I just want a Pepsi and a bag of chips, you know. But it's so good to see you." And for that brief moment, I wasn't ashamed because I knew I was talking to somebody that completely loved me. And he said, "Are you in this area?" And I said, "No, not very often, you know." And I said, "But I kind of know where your office is. I'll make my way to you eventually," something lame like that. I'm sure that's what I said, you know. And Bishop Meacham went home, and he told his wife, Mary Ann, and she said, "What? Let's go get him." And I was like, "Okay." So they came and found me, and for some reason I was still there. And it was a miracle because I never stayed in one place for very long. And they said, "Hey, we want to take you home." And I said, "How are you going to do that? You know?" And they said, "We don't care, we're going to do it." And so they took me home, and I don't know how many razors I used, I don't know how many showers I took. They burned my clothes, you know? And they put me in a hotel, and Craig's a real estate developer, and he said, I'll hire you, I know what you can do." Put me in a hotel, and I couldn't get my act together. I just couldn't flip the switch that quickly. And oh, I'm sorry, but yeah, they kicked me out of the hotel, and he said, "I've got this neighbor, and his name is Joseph Grenny, and he started this place called the Other Side Academy, and it's for the chronically homeless, incarcerated, and addicted. It's turning the lives around of men and women that you would never think could turn their lives around, or too far gone." And so he took me down to the bench, and it's a bench like this, about half this size, and it's wood, and it's very uncomfortable. And they say, "Sit on the bench." Well, the bench is a portal to a new life, that's what it is. And sometimes they'll make you sit there for 2 days. They want to know if you really want to do it, because they don't need you, you know? You need them. But they're there for you if you want to do it, if you want to save your life. But I was too proud. I looked up at these beliefs on the wall. You alone can do it, but you cannot do it alone. Make and keep promises. Self-reliance, there's no free lunch. We have some self-reliance missionaries here. Impeccable honesty, act as if, embrace humility, each one teach one, 200% accountability, forgiveness, boundaries. We are faith-friendly and pride in work. And the foundation to that, if this was a building, you could look at a foundation. The foundation is love. And so, well, what is that? That's just the gospel of Jesus Christ packaged in a way that people in my situation might be able to more easily understand what their mission is. And all these people were happy, all these big gang guys with tattoos, and you know, they're happy. And I'm like, this has gotta be fake. Can't be real, you know? And so, what did I do? I was a coward, and I left. had this golden opportunity, didn't know what kind of opportunity it was, and I left. Got hit by a car, got mangled, don't even remember it. Woke up in the ICU at the University Hospital with my mouth wired shut, braces on both legs, and it basically took me a year to become ambulatory again. And I saw them, Michael and Mary came and saw me with their older brother and sister, and the feeling on that hike that day is so seared into my memory, into my soul. Looking at how you were looking at your father who has stewardship over you, who is not exercising and honoring his stewardship. And I thought to myself, I will do whatever it takes. At this point, I really wanted to at that point. I'd had that epiphany before, but I wasn't strong enough to act on it. And so this couple, Bishop Meacham and his wife, kept coming and visiting me almost weekly for a year. And they said, we want you to meet Joseph Grenny. They're wrapping presents for the TOSA students up at, ironically, my old ward house. And so I went and met Joseph Grenny, and I still did not want to go back because I was too lazy. And he said, on the way back, he says, I want to show you where they're building. They're rebuilding a house over in your old neighborhood. And they drove me by, and when he pointed to where they were building, my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe it. Because the first owner of that house was my grandfather, James, and my grandmother, Louise Covey Moyle. So the chain of title on that residence goes James and Louise Moyle, Harold B. Lee, who was the prophet of the church at that time, and then the Joseph Grenny family. I knew right then that the Lord parted the Red Sea for me, and I would be such a fool not to go back. And so I went back to the other side academy when I could finally walk with a little bit of humility and a lot of will to want to be with them for the rest of eternity. And it was hard. It was hard to keep up with people sometimes a third of my age. But it was expected of me to do so, and I knew I had to do it, and I knew I had what it took to do it, and so I did. And those are our beliefs, and this 2.5 years was hardcore. There's no doctors or therapists or clinicians. It's completely peer-driven. All the staff members were former students, and it's just raw and in your face. Any tiny little bit, you're made aware of every single tiny behavior that got you to that point. And you don't think about your past. Well, you think about it, but you're not supposed to really think about it or talk about it, because a lot of us did a lot of great things, in our past, but we all got to that bench the same way. And so we were all the same. And so later in my stay, and it's raw and in your face, and it's, but there's never been an act of violence at the other side academy. It's amazing how it works. And twice a week we get together, and if you do something wrong on the floor, like, hey, you held the door open for that woman, or you left the toilet seat up, or you lied. It doesn't matter what it is, The only thing you can say is okay. And then we have little families within our larger family there, and you go kind of pass that information to your little family, and then it goes up the line to the staff. And if what you did was really wrong, you might get a contract, be put in a yellow shirt, and you're going to polish a toilet for a month. Literally, called a contract. And it's not to shame you, it's to let you think of, God, was that, what was the behavior that got me to that point? That helps you remember what was the behavior that got you to the bench. And so that's kind of how it works. But twice a week we get together, and we have these social enterprises, and that's how we keep the doors open. We don't take any government funding or insurance subsidies. It's free for people to go there and save their lives. They just have to have the grit to want to do it, because it's super hard. And twice a week when we get together in these groups, that's when the top of the pressure cooker comes off. That's when you say, hey, I did not do that, this is what happened. And then you're in a room with 25 of your peers, and you cannot get away with anything in that room, trust me. You hear at that point twice a week how everybody else sees your behavior. Because 20 people will say, this is what we see. And you're not fooling all of them. And so all of a sudden, a little bit at a time, I was able to take these bad behaviors that got me there to my pillow. And at the 6-month mark in my stay there, I was finally able to stop shaming myself enough where I could get back on my knees. And that was a game changer for me. Because I was too ashamed to get on my knees. Just like Adam and Eve grabbed the fig leaf, I just was too ashamed. I probably shouldn't make that comparison. It's probably not a good one, but I fought shame. And when I was finally able to start getting down on my knees, it started to reconnect me with something incredibly powerful, not only from the other side, but on this side, because it started to connect me to you again. Because when we pray for others, it's almost, the first step in serving others again. Because you're praying for them. You're taking the time to pray for somebody else. And I used to pray that you'd be protected from the adversary. But then I read one of the books that Joseph Granny wrote called Moroni's Addiction. And he had 2 sons that were heroin addicts. And when he dropped one of them off at a Walmart and said, when you clean up your life, we're here for you, he stopped praying for the adversary to protect them, except he would pray for them to have protection from the adversary, except where the growth that they're getting from that temptation gives them that ultimate growth. And I thought about that. I'm like, God, that's an odd thing to say. You pray for your children, except where they need growth. And I started to recognize my own life. I guess I needed this intense growth. I don't guess I know I needed it. I was so far off, and so as my compass started to realign, and I started to create a relationship again with my Father in heaven. And I started to not miss reading something in the scriptures every day, and getting down on my knees every day, and asking, Heavenly Father, help me one more day be sober. Help me that someday I can be reconnected with my children. Help me that someday I may be able to show and prove and honor that stewardship to you, to all of you, but especially to you, not by what I say, but by what I do, by my actions, by doing the next right thing all of the time. And so you would think that I would have, why would you be so weak as to go through all of that? Why would it take you so long to come back around? You had a testimony of Joseph Smith. You went on a mission. Well, guess what? Every tiny compromise that you make sets that trajectory, that eternal trajectory. Joseph knew when I came back to the Other Side Academy, he knew I was miserable. He saw it. I didn't talk about it. One of our beliefs is to act as if. And so I acted like, it's kind of like fake it till you make it, And so I didn't talk about what hurt. I didn't talk about, I did it with the right people, but not in general. I wouldn't even, oh gosh, I'm in pain, or oh, I'm struggling with this. We don't talk about addiction. We don't talk about therapy. We talk about the behaviors that got us to that bench. That's what we work on. And so Joseph saw I was struggling. He took me to the front of the Armstrong Mansion, which was the first mayor of Salt Lake. They bought that. That was their first building. And now they have 7 or 8 buildings throughout Salt Lake, and they've got a campus in Denver also. People are coming from all over the world to model this because it's done without government funding or insurance. Like I said, and all of these things suck off the government, and suck off insurance companies. And so politicians were coming and saying, how do you do this? Well, we run these social enterprises and we work really hard from day one to keep our doors open. And we have the #1 rated moving company in Utah. And I joke with the movers. I work with the thrift stores, but I joke with the movers. I'm like, now you guys have their permission to move their most precious belongings. You know, used to not have that permission. You did it anyway, but now you have their permission. You're the #1 rated moving company in Utah, and people are scared to hire them, but their friends say, hire them and you'll see. And they move something, and then they run back to the truck, and then they move the next thing. They run to the customer and say, we're so sorry we dinged a wall, or we dinged something, and they're completely accountable. And so that's the secret sauce of how this whole thing worked for our community. And Joseph sat me on the front porch of the mansion because he knew I was struggling. I was starting to get it. And he said, James, and I'll end with this. He said, James, I was at a youth conference once, and the speaker got up, and he got a ball of, he got one of those large spindles of construction twine, and he had somebody tie one piece to the microphone, and one piece of the twine, and the fellow came off the stage, and it had a bunch of glass on each side, and the guy went out into the parking lot and kept on walking with this big thing of twine, and everybody in the audience said, what on earth, you know? And then he had somebody come from the other side and tie another ball of construction twine and go out the door the other way, and they could see both these two individuals were carrying this, and they just kept on going. And the speaker said, right where they were tied to the microphone, he said, this is our temporal estate right here. That's the pre-existence, and that's eternity. And Joseph said, James, what you do right here determines the trajectory of that stream, of eternity, which is infinite. And if you want to be a strength, like I know you want to be a good steward again, do this right here, right now. And it burned on my soul. And it was interesting because Joseph didn't know it at the time. I did, but I hadn't talked about it yet. I knew Harold B. Lee. I knew my grandparents owned that home. I knew Harold B. Lee, and President Lee owned that home before Joseph. And President Lee said, you cannot light a fire in another soul unless it is burning in your own soul first. So I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to get my pilot light relit. And I needed help to do it. I couldn't do it on my own. I was too far gone. But thank goodness I was able to have that opportunity. I'm so grateful to be with you here today. Boy, there's a bunch of other stuff I was going to talk about, but I won't. Perhaps another time. But I want to bury my testimony again that living every tiny little commandment is so crucial. Please, if you catch yourself falling in any area of your life, do something about it immediately. Don't let the little things build up to become big things. And never lie to yourself. There's one time when you'll always have protection, no matter what. And President Monson said it, so I know it's true. If you are ever being tempted about anything, get down on your knees in humble supplication of the Father in the name of Jesus Christ, and you'll know what the right thing is to do. I'm sorry I lost that. I'm so grateful to have reacquired it. I'm so grateful to y'all. I bear this testimony to you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.